You know what's wild? I was at a local meet last weekend, and this dude rolls up in a fourth-gen Supra. Nothing too flashy on the outside, maybe some subtle aero, clean BBS wheels. But then he pops the hood, and there it was, this immaculate 2JZ-GTE sitting there like a work of art. Guy tells me it's pushing 850 horsepower on pump gas. Honestly, I've been around engines my whole life, and the 2JZ still gives me chills. See, there's this thing about the 2JZ GTE that separates it from literally every other engine that's ever been built. It's not just an engine, it's become this cultural phenomenon that spans continents and generations. Today we're diving deep into how Toyota accidentally created the most bulletproof, most tunable inline-six in automotive history, and why 30 years later, people are still chasing four-digit horsepower numbers with this thing. The story of the 2JZ GTE starts in the late 1980s, and man, what a time to be alive if you were into cars. Japan was in the middle of this insane bubble economy, and automotive engineers basically had blank checks to create whatever the hell they wanted. Toyota was looking around at their competition, BMW with their silky inline sixes, Mercedes with their over-engineered V8s, and they're like, nah, we're gonna do this our way. Now, the 2JZ family wasn't born in a vacuum. It was actually part of Toyota's much larger JZ engine family that kicked off in 1990. But here's where it gets interesting. While most manufacturers were chasing complexity, Toyota's engineers took this almost obsessive approach to overbuilding everything. And I mean everything. The Toyota 2JZ GTE is a legendary inline six-cylinder engine that was produced from 1991 to 2005. But the development story goes back even further. Toyota's chief engineers were dealing with this unique challenge. They needed an engine that could satisfy Japan's increasingly strict emission standards while also delivering supercar-level performance. The solution? Build it so ridiculously strong that it could handle whatever power you threw at it, then just detune it to meet regulations. I've actually had the chance to tear down a few 2JZs over the years, and the first time I pulled one apart, I honestly couldn't believe what I was looking at. The main bearing caps, they're not just bolted on, they're secured with both bolts and studs, creating this bulletproof bottom end that can handle boost levels that would split other engines in half. The block itself is this closed-deck cast iron masterpiece that weighs about as much as a small car. Toyota used what they called a semi-closed deck design, which basically means the cylinder walls have extra support around the top where all the combustion pressure tries to push things apart. It's engineering overkill at its finest, and that's exactly why we love it. All right, let's get into the nerdy stuff, because this is where the 2JZ GTE really starts to shine. We're talking about a 3.0-liter inline-six with an 86mm bore and 86mm stroke. A perfectly square engine design that balances rev capability with torque production. Valves are made of heat-resistant steel and have an included valve angle of 45 degrees, and the head design is just chef's kiss. Toyota used this dual overhead cam setup with 4 valves per cylinder, but here's the kicker. They sized those ports and valves like they were expecting way more power than the engine was making from the factory. The turbocharger setup is where things get really interesting. The first, 1991 to 1996, used sequential CT20 turbos in JDM models and larger CT12B turbos for export markets. Now, sequential turbos were this cutting-edge technology back then. Basically, you've got a small turbo that spools up quickly for low-end response, and then a larger turbo kicks in for top-end power. But here's what most people don't realize about the 2JZ GTE's turbo system. It wasn't just about power delivery. Toyota engineered this thing with longevity in mind. Those ceramic turbine wheels, yeah, they're fragile if you start turning up the boost, but at stock levels, they'll run forever. And the wastegate setup, the intercooler positioning, even the oil feed lines, everything was sized for reliability first, power second. The sequential system worked like this. At low RPMs, only the primary turbo is working, keeping lag to a minimum. Then around 4,500 RPM, the secondary turbo comes online, and you get this massive surge of power that just keeps building. It's honestly one of the most intoxicating power deliveries I've ever experienced. These engines produced 280 horsepower at 5,600 RPM and 320 pound-feet, 434 newton-meters of torque at 4,000 RPM in non-VVI-TI version. But we all know those numbers were, let's call them, conservative. Since 1989, Japanese automakers have avoided expensive horsepower wars by capping production car output in its homeland to 276 horsepower. But independent dyno testing showed these things were making closer to 320-330 horsepower at the wheels, which means they were probably pushing 380 to 400 at the crank from the factory. Now, the 2JZ-GTE ended up in several Toyota models, the Aristo, the Crown, some Lexus models, but let's be honest, it'll forever be associated with one car, the fourth-generation Supra. I remember the first time I drove a stock Super Turbo back in the late 90s. My buddy's Gad had just picked up a 97 in that gorgeous Renaissance red, and man, that car was something else. The way the 2JZ delivered power was just different. Most turbocharged engines of that era were either laggy monsters or peaky one-trick ponies. The 2JZ felt like driving a naturally aspirated engine until about 3,000 RPM, and then it would just pull all the way to redline. What made the Supra so special wasn't just the engine, it was how Toyota integrated everything. The sequential turbo system, the rear-mounted transmission for perfect weight distribution, the suspension geometry, it all worked together to create this balanced platform that could handle way more power than it was making. The 2JZ Supra is easily the most famous and beloved model to take motivation from these iconic inline sixes, and for good reason. Toyota basically built the perfect tuner car without even trying. The engine bay had tons of room for upgrades, the ECU was relatively easy to work with for the time, and the whole car was just begging for more power. But here's the thing that really sealed the deal. Hollywood. When The Fast and the Furious dropped in 2001, suddenly every teenager in America knew what a Supra was. That orange Supra sliding under the semi-truck? Pure automotive poetry. And while the movie might have taken some creative liberties with the physics, it introduced the 2JZ to a whole new generation of enthusiasts. This is where the story gets really crazy, because what happened next was completely unplanned. As car enthusiasts started tinkering with the engine, they quickly discovered they could double or even triple the power output with relative ease. I'll never forget my first experience with a seriously built 2JZ. This was probably 2003 or 2004, and I'm at a dyno day in SoCal. This guy rolls up with what looked like a bone stock Supra, completely sleeper, right down to the factory wheels. He straps it to the dyno, and I'm thinking maybe 400, 450 horsepower, typical bolt-ons. The engine starts loading up, and the numbers just keep climbing. 500, 600, 700, 800 horsepower. The dyno operator is literally shaking his head like he can't believe what he's seeing. Stock internals, stock block, just a single turbo swap, bigger injectors, and a tune. That was my holy shit moment with the 2JZ. See, what makes the 2JZ so special for tuning isn't just its strength, though that's obviously important. It's the combination of factors that all came together perfectly. First, you've got this massively overbuilt bottom end that can handle boost levels that would grenade other engines. With the right tuning, the 2JZ-GTE could easily surpass 1,000 horsepower. And that's not some internet myth, I've seen it firsthand. The head design is equally impressive. Those big ports and valves I mentioned earlier, they flow massive amounts of air even with basic porting work. The camshaft profiles are relatively conservative from the factory, which means there's tons of room for improvement without sacrificing reliability. But here's what really set the 2JZ apart from its competitors: the aftermarket support. Companies like HKS, Greddy, Apexi, they all saw the potential early on and started developing serious performance parts. Single turbo conversion kits, standalone ECUs, forged internals. Within a few years, you could build a 1,000 horsepower 2JZ with parts you could order from a catalog. The progression was insane to watch. First, people figured out the stock turbos were the bottleneck.
Single turbo swaps became the standard, and suddenly 500 to 600 horsepower was achievable with bolt-on modifications. Then the fuel system became the limitation. Bigger pumps, larger injectors, and you're looking at 700, 800 horsepower territory. For the really crazy stuff, and by crazy, I mean 1,000+ horsepower, you needed to start upgrading internals. But here's the thing that blew everyone's mind. Even at those power levels, the stock block could handle it. This engine is capable of exceeding 1,000 bhp with the right modifications, and I've personally seen stock block 2JZs making 1,200+ horsepower with the right turbo setup.
What's really wild about the 2JZ phenomenon is how global it became. I mean, this is a Japanese engine that was primarily sold in Japan, but somehow it ended up influencing car culture on literally every continent. The import scene in America went absolutely nuts for these things. Back in the early 2000s, you had people spending ridiculous money to import JDM Supras, Aristos, whatever they could get their hands on just to get that 2JZ engine. I knew guys who were buying crashed Supras just for the drivetrain and swapping them into everything: 240SXs, RX-7s, even domestic muscle cars. Europe caught on pretty quickly too. The UK tuning scene especially embraced the 2JZ, and some of the wildest builds I've ever seen came out of places like Abbey Motorsport and other British tuning houses. They were doing things with 2JZs that even the Japanese hadn't thought of. But it wasn't just the West Coast drift scene or European track cars. The 2JZ found its way into drag racing, roll racing, standing mile events. Anywhere people wanted serious power, the 2JZ showed up. The engine now delivers 1,851 HP and 1,080 pound-feet of torque in some of the most extreme builds, with boost pressures that would make your head spin. The engine swap culture really took off too. People started realizing that if you wanted bulletproof reliability with massive power potential, the 2JZ was the answer. I've seen them swapped into BMWs, Mercedes, American muscle cars, even trucks. There's something beautiful about a 1,000 horsepower 2JZ sitting in a '69 Camaro. It shouldn't work, but it absolutely does. Social media really accelerated the whole thing. YouTube, Instagram, forums, suddenly people could share their builds with the entire world. That 2,000 horsepower drag car from Australia, you could watch it run 6-second quarter miles from your living room. The street racing scene in Japan, there were entire video series dedicated to these insane super builds tearing up the highways. Here's the thing that really gets me about the 2JZ story. We're talking about an engine that's been out of production for almost 20 years now, and it's still the gold standard for tuned performance. This legendary inline-six established benchmarks for strength, reliability, and tuning potential that remain unmatched today. The prices have gone absolutely insane though. I remember when you could pick up a decent 2JZ-GTE for $5 or $6 grand. Now, you're looking at $15,000 to $20,000 for a good running engine, and that's if you can even find one. Clean Supras are selling for 6 figures, which is just mental when you think about it. But the demand hasn't slowed down at all. If anything, it's gotten stronger. You've got this whole new generation of enthusiasts who grew up watching YouTube videos of 1,500 horsepower Supras, and now they want to build their own. The problem is, good 2JZ engines are becoming unicorns. The aftermarket has adapted though. Companies are now producing everything you need to build a 2JZ from scratch, and I mean everything. Dart makes aftermarket blocks, you can get custom crankshafts, forged pistons, the works. Some of these modern 2JZ builds are making power levels that would have been unimaginable 20 years ago. I've seen modern 2JZ builds pushing 2,500+ horsepower for dedicated drag applications. We're talking about boost pressures over 60 psi, turbochargers the size of garbage cans, and fuel systems that could supply a small aircraft. It's absolutely bonkers, but it shows just how much development potential the basic 2JZ architecture still has. The tuning software has evolved too. Back in the day, you needed a standalone ECU and hours of dyno time to get things dialed in properly. Now, with modern engine management systems and cloud-based tuning, you can have a 1,000 horsepower 2JZ that starts on the first try and gets decent fuel economy when you're not trying to melt the tires. So what is it about the 2JZ that makes it so special?
I mean, there have been other strong engines, other tunable platforms, but nothing has captured the imagination quite like this. After spending the better part of 2 decades around these engines, I think I've figured out what makes the 2JZ different. First and foremost, it's the over-engineering. Toyota built this engine to handle way more than it was ever asked to do from the factory. The 2JZ-GTE engine from Toyota was over-engineered and became one of the most tuned power plants on the market. That cast iron block, those massive main bearing caps, the closed deck design, it's all overkill for a 300 horsepower engine, but perfect for a 1,000 horsepower monster. But here's the thing that really sets it apart. Toyota didn't just build one strong component, they built everything strong. The crankshaft is forged steel, not cast. The connecting rods are beefier than they need to be. The pistons are low-compression forged units from the factory. Even the head bolts and main studs are way over-spec'd. It's like they built the entire engine expecting someone to triple the power output. The cylinder head design is absolutely brilliant, too. Those intake and exhaust ports are massive, way bigger than they needed to be for the factory power level. The valve sizes are generous, the combustion chamber design promotes good flow, and the whole thing is just begging for more air. I've flow tested stock 2JZ heads against heavily modified heads from other engines, and the 2JZ often wins even in stock form. The timing couldn't have been better either. The 2JZ hit the market just as the import scene was exploding in America, right when tuning technology was advancing rapidly, and at the exact moment when street racing culture was becoming mainstream. It was the perfect storm of circumstances. But even more than that, it arrived just as the aftermarket was figuring out how to really support these platforms. See, in the 80s and early 1990s, if you wanted to modify a car, you were pretty much on your own. You had to fabricate stuff, figure out tuning yourself, hope you didn't blow anything up. By the time the 2JZ really hit its stride in the mid to late 1990s, companies like HKS, Greddy, and AEM were developing sophisticated solutions: standalone engine management, precision turbochargers, proper intercooler setups. The infrastructure was there to really unlock the engine's potential. The sequential turbo system deserves special mention too. While other manufacturers were struggling with turbo lag or sacrificing low-end power for top-end rush, Toyota created this system that gave you the best of both worlds. That smooth, linear power delivery made the 2JZ feel accessible to regular drivers, while still providing that explosive top end that tuners craved. But honestly, I think the real magic of the 2JZ is how it democratized high performance. Before this engine came along, if you wanted serious power, you needed either a big V8 or a completely custom-built race engine. The 2JZ proved that with the right platform, a regular enthusiast could build something that would embarrass supercars. I can't tell you how many times I've seen 600, 700 horsepower 2JZ builds that were done in home garages by guys who weren't professional engine builders. The accessibility factor is huge. You don't need exotic materials or NASA-level engineering to make big power with a 2JZ. Basic bolt-on modifications can get you to 500 horsepower. Intermediate stuff gets you to 700 to 800, and even the really wild builds use relatively straightforward approaches. Bigger turbos, more fuel, better engine management. It's not mysterious or overly complicated. There's also this emotional connection that people have with the engine. It's not just about the numbers, though those are impressive. It's about the sound, the way it delivers power, the knowledge that you're driving something truly special. That inline-6 growl under boost is absolutely intoxicating, and once you've experienced a properly built 2JZ pulling hard through the gears, everything else feels a little disappointing. The sound is honestly a big part of it. V8s sound angry, 4-cylinders sound busy, but an inline-6, there's something musical about it. The harmonics are just right. When you're sitting behind a 2JZ at full boost, it's like listening to a perfectly tuned instrument. Add in the turbo whistle, the wastegate chatter, the induction noise. It creates this symphony that's completely addictive. But what really cemented the 2JZ's legendary status was its consistency. Other engines might make big power, but they'd break, or they'd be finicky to tune, or they'd only work under specific conditions. The 2JZ just worked. You could beat on it day after day, run it hard at the track, daily drive it, whatever. It didn't care. That reliability at high power levels was what separated it from everything else. The community aspect can't be ignored either. The 2JZ attracted this incredible group of enthusiasts who were willing to share knowledge, help each other out, and push the boundaries together. The forums, the meetups, the tech sessions, there was this collaborative spirit that helped everyone get better results. You didn't see that kind of community support around every engine platform. And then there's the versatility factor. The 2JZ works in everything. Drift cars, drag cars, road race cars, street machines, show cars. It doesn't matter what you're building. The 2JZ fits. That adaptability is part of why it became so ubiquitous in the tuning scene. Looking back, the 2JZ represents this perfect moment in automotive history where Japanese engineering excellence met American modification culture and created something bigger than either could have achieved alone. It's not just an engine, it's a testament to what happens when you build something right the first time and then let passionate people run wild with it.